Hello, good afternoon everyone and welcome to Infinite Learning's webinar. My name is Rebecca Anand. I'm the co-founder and managing partner for Infinite Learning. Today we are delighted to be running this webinar in partnership with James Anderson, and we welcome him to speak about growth mindset and dispelling the myths and misunderstandings, creating strategies that work. Now, before I hand over to James, just a few small areas of housekeeping. So that you are aware, attendees are automatically on listen-only mode. We will allow James to deliver his presentation in full, but there will be some question and answer time at the end of the session. Please feel free to use the chat area to ask a question at any point during the presentation, and we will use probably the last 15 to 20 minutes of the webinar to answer as many of these questions as possible. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce James Anderson. James, over to you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm coming to you from this evening for me. I know it's this afternoon for many of you, and probably good morning for a few others. I'm in Melbourne tonight, and it is a very cold 10 degrees outside. We had a storm go through a few moments ago, so if you hear a little clap of thunder and a bit of rain on the roof, that's what's going on. As we let a few other people in, we're still sort of seeing people roll into the room right now. Take a moment, show me you're here, get your fingers out on the keyboard in the chat box, and I'd like you to tell me 3 things, please. Could you tell me the school you've come from, the city you live in, and the room you are in right now? So for me, it would be, I'm not in a school at the moment, so it's just my business in Melbourne, and the room I'm in is my home office. So I'm curious to know where all of you are at the moment. So tell me the school, the city you're in, and the room you're in, and I should be able to see that come up on the chat box. So if you see me glance in this direction, it's because I'm looking over to the chat. So I'll let people do that and start things off just as we sort of get rolling. The reason we're having this webinar is because we have an overwhelming amount of research that tells us that growth mindsets matter. The work of Carol Dweck and the others around her have shown that growth mindsets have a huge impact on student performance, on adult performance. But at the same time, what we've been discovering is that our interventions in schools, our attempts to change students' growth mindsets, are largely failing. So while we know that growth mindsets are important, our efforts to change them, the things we're actually doing in schools, haven't been having the impact that we'd like. And I think there's some big misunderstandings around this work, and a lot of them get perpetuated in social media. So we're going to go through a few of those today. But as we just start off, just for those of you who perhaps aren't as familiar with Carol Dweck's work, because we are talking about Carol Dweck's work, there's a lot of use of the term mindset, success mindset and other things. We're focused on this work largely around Carol Dweck. Basically, Carol Dweck describes 2 types of people. Now, clearly, there are not 2 types of people in the world, but we're going to pretend like there are for a little while. And what she says is someone with a fixed mindset sees the world like this. Someone with a fixed mindset says, hey, this is me. The person you see here today, pretty much the same person you'll see standing here in 5 years' time, because this is just who I am. And when you see yourself like that, here I am today, this will be me tomorrow and in the future, you spend your life looking inwards. You ask yourself, who am I? What skills and abilities do I have? And as a result of discovering the answer to that question, you ask yourself, where do I fit in the world? Because I could never do what you do. You're amazing. Your abilities are so different to mine. I couldn't do what you do. But I'm a little bit like the person down the road, so maybe I could do something like that. And that's the fixed mindset, trying to discover their abilities and work out where they fit. Someone with a growth mindset, on the other hand, looks at the world very differently. They look at the world like this. Hey, look at me. The person standing here is just the person I happen to be today. I changed, not just a little bit, I changed a lot. I changed some of my most basic characteristics, my talents, my abilities, even my intelligence. The person standing here today is a shadow of the person who will be standing here in 5 years' time, because I changed myself to become the person I want to be. And when you see yourself like that, you don't spend your life looking inwards, asking, who am I and where do I fit? You spend your life looking outwards, saying, who do I want to become? And in that difference, fixed mindset, who am I? Where do I fit? Growth mindset, who do I want to be? What do I need to do to become that person? Lies perhaps the key difference between a fixed and a growth mindset. And that is the idea of choice. You see, it's not that people with a fixed mindset make bad choices. They just don't see the choice in the first place. I can't do what you do. It's not that I choose not to, it's just I never could. Now, in a nutshell, that's it. Okay, we could almost finish the webinar right now and say that's what a fixed and growth mindset is. It's an idea that lives in your head. This is going to become really important as we go through the webinar today. But a fixed or growth mindset is just an idea. It's just a set of beliefs that live in your mind. And as a result of that set of beliefs, there's a whole bunch of symptoms. I use the word very deliberately. These behaviors that you often see listed as being the mindset aren't the mindset. They're just the behaviors that result from this set of beliefs. So, for example, someone with a fixed mindset avoids a challenge. And why wouldn't you? For someone with a fixed mindset, a challenge is just an opportunity to fail. Sure, you might be able to succeed at that, but if you fail, that failure is permanent and everyone will know where your limits are. So much better for you to say, I could do that and not, rather than try and fail and as a result expose who you really are. These people also give up easily. And again, why wouldn't you? For you, many of you have struggled with something. You know, who hasn't struggled with something in their life? And for someone with a fixed mindset, if you struggled with it today, it was hard today, it's going to be hard tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. It never gets easier. So as a result, your life becomes about the path of least resistance. When things get too hard, you go, well, that's not for me. If it was something I could do, it would be easy for me. So I won't do that, it's too hard. I'll go find the things that I am good at. These people see effort as a bad thing. Now, in the course that we're going to offer later on, I'm going to talk a lot about effort. But suffice to say for the moment that this is a growth mindset, not an effort mindset. And what we often see in schools and in homes around the world, students doing this, you know, they put all their effort in, they go, I call that the constipation version of effort. But what happens then is mum or dad or the teacher comes up and says, oh, good effort, good to see you trying so hard, keep up the hard work. It's a shame you're not learning anything. But as long as you've tried your hardest, that's okay. Can I suggest that's possibly one of the most damaging things we can say to a child? As long as you've tried your hardest, that's okay. What's the underlying message there? The standard's not very good, but you've put everything into it. So I guess that standard's never going to improve. I'll say it again. It's not an effort mindset. It's a growth mindset. And if the sort of effort you're putting in is not leading to growth, it's not because you're not capable of the growth, it's because you're not putting in the right type of effort. And this whole praise effort thing, Carol Dweck's pointed out, has often become the consolation prize and sent very negative messages about growth and growth mindset to students. These students ignore your feedback, not because they're difficult, just because they don't think your feedback is helpful. If they could do it, they would have done it. So any feedback that you might give them is seen as criticism. Is just pointing out their faults, so they don't want to hear that. And they're threatened by the success of other people, because everything you can do that I can't just makes me look bad. So I will cut you down, I will avoid the comparisons, because if you're better than me today, you're always going to be better than me. For these people, the being has to come before the doing. All right, I'm going to say that again. From the fixed mindset world, you have to be something before you can do it. So these people will ask themselves, do I have musical abilities? Before they'll go to a music lesson. They have to ask themselves, am I a natural leader? Before they'll take on the leadership role. And you might have heard students express this sort of idea to you, perhaps a child who's come up to you and said, excuse me, sir, do you think I'll be good at this? Who's heard that question? I hear that question all the time. And what we're hearing is the student saying, can you look inside me? Can you tell me I've already got the ability to do this? And in doing that, take away all risk of failure. And these people think learning, when they come into classrooms, learning is about discovering your abilities. They sit in classrooms and wonder if they're going to be able to do what the teacher is asking them to do. Obviously, growth mindset, when you see yourself as changeable, very, very different set of behaviours associated with it. For someone with a growth mindset, they embrace a challenge. Don't waste my time with easy things. Give me hard things, things that stretch me, challenge me, help me grow. These people with growth mindsets are more persistent because they understand that things that are hard today will be easy tomorrow. See, someone with a fixed mindset sees hard, harder, really hard, impossibly hard, unbelievably. Someone with a growth mindset sees hard, easy, hard, easy. It doesn't get harder and harder. It's just the next step that is always hard. So they understand that struggle and effort is the norm. And that's what we should be encouraging in our classrooms. These kids see effort as a good thing. All right, if you try to praise these kids for their effort, they want to hear it all day, every day. If you try to praise them for the standard and say, this is a great assignment, they're likely to turn around and say, yeah, I know, but did you see what I had to do to earn that? Because these students understand that their best is only their best when you measure by yesterday's standards. By tomorrow, it's going to be their second best. So they're not particularly interested in what they've just produced. They're interested in what they had to do to produce it. These students learn from your feedback. They're the first ones with their hands up. They know they're not meant to know the answers. They're there to work out, to work through, to develop their thinking. And they love the success of other people. Everything you can do just highlights that it's possible. You used to be just like me, and you did to become. And I don't want to do what you do. But just knowing that you started like me and were able to become that person, well, I want to do this other thing. But if you can achieve that and that person can achieve that, how inspiring. That means I can achieve what I want to achieve as well. Because these students understand that becoming comes before being. They don't look inside themselves and say, have I got the ability? They say, I haven't got any ability, but I'd love some. I'm not musical, but what those musical people do is amazing. I would love to do that. Can I have some music lessons, please, so I can develop that ability? And they understand that learning is about creating your abilities. They understand that they're not trying to tap into their potential, to reach their potential, to discover what they're good at. They know, this is me, this is as good as it gets, but it doesn't have to stay this way. I can become the sort of person that I want to become. They understand what George Bernard Shaw told us many, many years ago, which was learning your life isn't about finding yourself. How often do we hear that? How often do we hear people talking about wanting to discover who they are, find their passion, discover their abilities? Whereas life's not like that. Life is about creating yourself, about choosing who you want to become and taking action to become that person. Now, in a nutshell, that's what fixed and growth mindset is about and the behaviours you see associated with each. I want to reiterate, because we'll come back to this over again, that they're just ideas in your head, and the ideas that are in your head drive these behaviours. Now, I'm guessing if you had a choice, you'd want to see most of your students with a growth mindset. Yeah? I think that's probably the case. Unfortunately, counter to what social media will tell you, it's not as easy as putting up a poster that says, this is fixed, this is growth. Kids, can you do this, please? But that's what 90% of growth mindset strategies boil down to. Don't say that, say this. Don't say you can't. No, don't say you can't. Say you can't yet, and you'll be all right. I mean, seriously, if it was that easy, don't you think we would have worked that out by now? I mean, the whole not yet thing, we'll talk about it a bit later on, but there's a huge problem with not yet. And the problem is that how many times in classrooms and in homes has a parent or a teacher said, don't say you can't, just say you can't yet. And so the problem there is that at that point, that teacher, that parent is making a promise to the child that they will be able to do it. And in a week, in a month, in a term, in a year, when not yet has turned into still not yet, and that student has failed to grow, then two things have happened. One, that student has literally learnt through their own experience that they don't grow. And in learning that, they've learnt not to trust you because you made a promise that they would be able to do it. And that promise wasn't kept. So if we're going to talk about changing mindsets, what we've got to talk about is changing beliefs. How do we change a deep belief about ourselves? Because some of this mindset stuff, it is really about your most inner beliefs about yourself, the type of person you are and your capacity to change that. So if we're going to play in this space, if we're going to try and develop growth mindsets in our schools, there's a few things we need to understand, and dispelling some of the myths and at least putting us on the right track is what we're here for today. And if there's one misunderstanding about this work that is absolutely critical, it's this one. I don't know how to put this any more clearly than I'm about to put it. But a growth mindset is not the growth. I'm going to say that again. A growth mindset is not growth. It is just the understanding that growth is possible. Just having a growth mindset does not guarantee you the growth. And in fact, you don't need a growth mindset in order to grow. Carol Dweck's book, here it is here. I was rereading it recently, and by the way, if you're worried about the black screen underneath, it's deliberate, so don't worry about that. I was rereading Carol Dweck's book recently, and just the first chapter, just the first 15 or so pages, she listed about 15 examples of people with growth mindsets and people with fixed mindsets, all of whom were very, very successful in their own way. And one of the things that struck me was that not a single one of them had read her book before it was published. Think about that for a moment. Where do people get their mindsets from before there's a poster to say, this is fixed, this is growth, do that please? Before a teacher decides to say, not yet, all the time. Before you had a lesson about growth mindsets, where did you get your mindset from? I'm going to leave that question hanging for a little while. Because the misunderstanding I want to talk about right now is this idea that it's not the growth. All it is the invitation to grow. Someone with a fixed mindset says, well, if I can't do it today, I'll never be able to do it, so no point in trying. And they don't even get up to attempt it. And if you never practice at all, then you're never going to get better. But someone with a growth mindset says, well, I'm not meant to be able to do it. I'm not trying to discover my ability to throw a ball or to write an essay. I've got to create that ability. So you get up and you give it a go. But getting up and giving it a go is not the same as achieving the growth. All a growth mindset tells you is I can grow. It doesn't tell you how to achieve the growth. And this is at the heart of so many misunderstandings about this work, that just changing a mindset won't guarantee you achievement of the growth. So when I do this work with teachers, I talk about this concept of learning agility. And learning agility, you'll notice here, down here, underneath, that growth mindset is on the bottom. And it's on the bottom not because it's the least important, but because it is the foundation. It is the invitation to take action. But if you don't take the right sort of action, you still don't achieve the growth. And that's why we need to include the behaviours, the dispositions, Art, Costa and Bennett Kalick would call habits of mind. And this other work, so Carol Dweck's work on the bottom, Art, Costa and Bennett Kalick's work here, and this other work that is critical around the process of stretch and challenge and going beyond your comfort zone, the work of Anders Ericsson, the expertise expert. And you might have come across his work when you've heard the term deliberate or purposeful practice, or the 10,000 hour rule. It's not until you get all three of those elements right that you actually achieve the growth. And I suspect you are here today not just because you want students to understand that growth is possible, but because you want them to understand how to achieve the growth and then to go and actually achieve it. Now, I'd encourage you to read all those books, but if you can't read all of them, then this one is a great book. And I'm not sure if you can see here the author there. The author's fantastic, seriously, wonderful stuff. Sorry, that's maybe a bit of Australian humour for you. But what I've tried to do in the Agile Learner is bring those three ideas together, because there's all this misunderstanding about growth mindset that says, if you just believe, you can achieve. This is one of those what I call half-truths. You look at people who've succeeded and yeah, they believed, but you don't believe your way to success. You don't believe your way there. You can't just sit there in your living room chair and visualize yourself succeeding and then expect to succeed. All a belief can do is lead you to act. And when you act effectively, engage the right behaviours, the habits of mind, in the right process, virtuous practice that Anders Ericsson talks about, then you can achieve. Right, I've said this. I'm just going to skip a slide here to give us a chance to do something. All right, there you go. Excuse me. Most of you will have seen a poster like this. This poster always makes me laugh. Change your words, change your mindset. Again, if it was that easy, we would have worked it out years ago. And like so much of social media, this poster contains a half-truth. All right, and the half-truth is people with a growth mindset will say, what am I missing? Where people with a fixed mindset will say, I'm just not good at this. But just asking students to say that instead of that doesn't change their underlying beliefs. It just changes their language. And so what this poster does is it gets the message exactly back the front. It's not change your words, change your mindset. It should be change students' mindset and watch their words change. Just changing their language, making them act as if they've got a growth mindset. Sure, it might help a little bit, but it's not really addressing the underlying belief system. We've got to change that belief system and then their words will change. All right, let's talk about this. Fixed versus growth mindset. If understanding that a growth mindset is not the growth and that you've got to engage in the right behaviours and the right process to achieve the growth is the number one misunderstanding, then the number two big misunderstanding is this: fixed versus growth. Which have you got, a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? Now, I'll tell you a story because in a webinar I can't ask you this question, but I was in a principals conference in New Zealand a year or two ago now, before COVID-19 and travel restrictions, obviously. And I explained to the principals there that, you know, this mindset stuff, it's not just kid stuff, adults, me and you, we've got mindsets as well. And an adult, a teacher with a fixed mindset will look at their students and say, well, that one's my smart one, they're going to get an A. This one could pass, and I don't even know why that one's in my class. They're not very bright. And in the staff room, a fixed mindset teacher will be saying, look, you know, I'm just a good teacher, but those teachers are never going to be any good, and all these sort of negative things. Whereas a growth mindset teacher will be saying, all my students can learn, I'll help them all improve, and as a teacher, I'm going to support all the other teachers and learn and grow in my own practice. And I asked this room of principals, having said that, how many of them have got a fixed mindset? And in a room of 300 principals, about 2 of them went, well, maybe me, perhaps. Oh. Basically what we've done, and you look at social media, I mean, this is one of my favorite bits of social media. What we've done is we've told you you've got a choice of 2. One of them's bloody awful. Which one have you got? And of course, what everyone has done has said, well, I haven't got that fixed one. I must have a growth one. Thanks very much. And as soon as you say that, no further work is necessary. I mean, look at this poster down here. See, according to this poster, not only is a fixed mindset a bad thing, it's actually evil as well. So it's not surprising that what's happened is we've created what Carol Dweck and her colleague Susan Mackey describe as a false mindset. And a false mindset is somebody who understands the difference between fixed and growth, may advocate a growth mindset, may adopt growth mindset strategies in their school and in their classroom. But what they actually do, what they actually say, might be sending much more fixed messages. For example, I worry about the number of students, number of teachers, number of schools that have adopted growth mindsets. and have adopted that one growth mindset strategy, praise effort. And praise effort through the false mindset has actually turned into praise struggling students for effort. So what's actually happening in the classroom is when someone is struggling, they go, oh, good work, keep up the hard work. But when someone achieves easily, they say, oh, great, well done. See, how natural would it be for you to go up to a student who's just completed something really easily and say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that was so easy for you. You should have been struggling just like this student over here, because that struggle and the effort is the only way we really grow. And the fact that you did that easily, that means that this was not where you need to learn, not where your learning zone is. But we tend not to do that. And that's one of the reasons why John Hattie, many of you are familiar with John Hattie, stood up at a conference, Visible Learning Conference a few years ago, and said that the effect size of fixed versus growth mindset on student performance is about 0.19, which for those of you who understand John Hattie's work, means that it has very little effect. But he went on at the same conference where he's presenting with Carol Dweck and said the reason is because adults have a fixed mindset and keep treating students accordingly. You see, the challenge here is that you do not get to choose your mindset. I'm going to say that again. You don't get to choose your mindset. Your mindset is part of what we call your unconscious bias. It's what we do when we're not paying attention. It's the fact that all last term, all the difficult questions got directed to this student and this one, and a couple of consolation questions to that student. It's the fact that when we walk up to the student we believe is capable, we stand up straight, we speak with a strong voice and expect them to do better. But when we talk to the other student, we're a little bit forgiving and we say, look, yeah, that's all right. Just hand up the work you've done. That'll do for you. Now, I'm exaggerating, obviously, but it's that everyday communication through our posture, through our unintended actions that are sending fixed messages to students all the time. And if I can leave you in this webinar with just one key idea to take away, and we've got a couple of giveaways to give you here, it's this idea. You've seen this sort of diagram all over social media, fixed and growth and black and green and all the rest of it that go with it. The next time you see it, this is what I want you to do to this diagram. I want you to tear it up down the middle like that. Because except in intellectual discussions, when you're talking about the difference between fixed and growth, the fixed and growth mindset doesn't exist. Nobody in the world has a fixed mindset. No one. There's no one sitting there in anywhere that I've ever been going, this is me. I've never learned anything. This is who I've always been. This is how I'll die. I don't change at all. Nobody does that. And there's no one in the world going, if I could live long enough, I could be good at everything. No one does that either. In reality, we're all somewhere on a continuum between fixed and growth. And in the handout section in your control panel on the GoToWebinar, there's two documents there. One of them is about this mindset continuum. And it describes how it's not a case of love effort or hate effort, but rather a progression of how much you want to embrace effort. And our job as educators, and this is the handout you'll be given, our job as educators is not to instill or install a growth mindset, but rather to help students become more growth oriented. So one of the handouts that you'll be sent in the follow-up email is actually this ebook. Now, this is a physical book, obviously, but this is a book I wrote to help explain this idea, and it goes into more depth than we have time available for today. But the reason we need to talk about a continuum is, to start off with, it destigmatizes the fixed and growth mindset. That room full of principals that I spoke to, when I said who's got a fixed mindset, nobody owned up. But when I asked who could be more growth oriented, every hand in the room went up. So it gives us permission to not be fixed, but at the same time not be growth. It reflects the real world. As I said before, there's not two types of people in the world, and there's not two types of moments in the world. Sometimes when I'm very fixed, and other times when I'm really growth. It doesn't happen like that. Most of the time we're somewhere in the middle. It helps us address that false mindset by allowing us to really dig into our own beliefs, and it recognises what Carol Dweck's been talking about for a long time now, that a growth mindset is not a declaration. It is a journey, and it is a journey along this continuum. Now, I invite you to download the Mindset Continuum and to keep an eye on your email for this book. And as you read through the descriptions, ask yourself, where do you see most of your students on that continuum? And then ask yourself this question: how much better would your classrooms be? How much better would your learning outcomes be if you could move students just one notch to the right? You're not going to have them all have growth mindsets. That's an unrealistic expectation. What you need to do is to move them just a little bit across. And that's one of the other reasons we need to look at this work, because when we started doing this 5, 8 years ago, people picked up Carol's work and said, this is fixed, this is growth, we want kids to have a growth mindset. We were told that if we tell kids to say not yet and things like that, they would have a growth mindset. And we went back to our classrooms and tried. And it didn't work. 6 months down the track, we were looking around and went, yeah, I don't think these kids have really got growth mindsets. And 12 months down the track, we said, yeah, no, they don't have growth mindsets. And 18 months down the track, we said, well, what are we doing this year instead? I know that all of you have had that experience with one initiative or another, where something comes in, it's going to change the world, it doesn't, and it gets left behind. And the tragedy with this work is that we can't leave this behind. This work is critically important to student learning. Our interventions to this point in time haven't worked because we've been going about it the wrong way. One of the things we need to understand is that a growth mindset, or our success with growth mindsets, won't be measured by the number of students with a growth mindset. It'll be measured by how much more growth oriented they've become. Our job is not to instill or install or adopt a growth mindset. Our job is to nourish, to nudge, to nurture a more growth orientated mindset. How do you do it? Having cleared up some of these misunderstandings, this is going to be my last slide, and then I'll ask Rebecca and the team at Infinite Learning to see if there's any questions. So if you've got questions, now's a good time to make sure you put them in the chat box. The way we go about changing mindsets, first off, you don't get to start. You're already doing it, right? You influence students' mindsets every day. So your only choice is to say, are we going to choose to do this better, or are we going to continue to do this sort of default unconscious mixed mindset? And for example, the messages we send, what are you more likely to hear in your school? Are you more likely to hear someone talk about, your high achieving students or your students who are achieving highly? Now think about that. Will you hear people say high achieving students, or do they say students who are achieving highly? Because the first one is a type of students, high achieving students. The second is about what you do. The first one makes very fixed judgments about students. The second one says this is something you're in control of. From there, you can use the catchphrases, the not yets and believe and you can achieve, but they're often half-truths and they don't have a lot of impact. You can adopt the rules, and that's the things like praise effort and celebrate mistakes. Seriously, can we stop the celebrating mistakes thing? I can talk to you another day about this, but some of the students that are learning to celebrate mistakes, they're becoming pilots and surgeons. And I don't want to be on an operating table or in a plane with a pilot or a surgeon who thinks mistakes are a good thing. So let's have that conversation another day. When we start talking about the strategies we use in your schools and classrooms to change mindsets, the first one we'll talk about is to create what I call nudges. And nudges are little reminders to help us overcome our unconscious bias. And I'll give you two right now. Here's two things you can implement in your classroom tomorrow that will create growth, positive growth mindset movers. The first one, when you group students, right? We're always grouping students. Group them using verbs, not adjectives. Right? Don't talk about your music students. Talk about your students who are studying music. Don't talk about your high achieving students. Talk about your students who are achieving highly. Make your groups about what students do, not who they are. And that will encourage a more growth-oriented message. Secondly, another one you can use, whenever you talk about students' bests, and we're talking about students' best work, best performance all the time, always attach a timestamp. When you say best to date. This is your best so far. This is your best this year. When we do that, what we're announcing to the student is that this is a current high watermark, but we expect improvement. We haven't seen everything from you. It's going to keep growing. And in the work that we do, in the webinars that we're going to run, I go through all these nudges to help fill the environment with these growth mindset messages. From there, we talk about how we change our own mindset, because the single biggest influencer on a student's mindset is not going to be the poster on the wall. It's not going to be the lesson about mindsets. It's going to be your mindset and the mindset of the adults around them that are constantly sending little messages through their body language, their word choice, and all sorts of other things. And ultimately, we'll talk about how we can create a growth mindset culture by talking about the system that aligns with the growth messages we're trying to send. So the key here is to recognize that you don't get to adopt, install a growth mindset. We nourish, we nurture, we nudge to help students become increasingly growth orientated. And the question I asked you before about the examples Carol Dweck uses in her book, where did they get their mindset from before mindset was a thing? They got it from their own lived experiences. No one had to teach them that they could grow. They had experienced it. And the best thing we can do is not only work on the student's belief, but their ability to grow. Because when they achieve that growth, you don't need a poster to recognize you've changed. You know that from your own lived experience. So we need to do less teaching about growth mindsets and more teaching for a growth mindset. And that's the work that I'd love to be able to do with you at some other time. But Rebecca, I think I might pause there and see what questions the group has come up with today.
Yeah, sure. James, first of all, can I just say a massive thank you, actually. I personally found that so fascinating, insightful and refreshing. Many of us are talking about online learning and COVID and how we deal with it. And actually just to go back to pure learning and teaching, I found really inspiring, and some of the comments that we've had that have come in support that as well. Just people saying this is just fantastic, so great to be here, so interesting. So thank you very much for that.
I can stop you, Rebecca, because you said something there that I'd love to follow up on. Our whole reaction to COVID. Imagine the reaction of someone with a fixed mindset when they find themselves in this sort of challenge. You know, suddenly the world has thrown this challenge at us, and the only difference between challenge and adversity is the source. Challenges we take on, adversity are forced on us. And someone with a fixed mindset finds themselves in the current situation and goes, can I do this? Have I got the ability to be the sort of person that can succeed in this environment? And the answer is going to be no. Like, we weren't prepared for this. But someone with a growth mindset will go, I'm not the sort of person who can deal with this, but I know how to become the person who can, and they will grow out of this sort of situation and become better as a result.
Yeah, no, I loved that continuum, that idea that you're not one or the other and that you grow. I thought that was really, really insightful. And I'd just also like to say, before we get to the questions, how wonderful it is to have people from obviously Dubai and the UAE, but beyond that, across the Gulf, but also from the Philippines, from Manila and from New York. So welcome to all of you. This is definitely a bonus of online learning, is it not? So moving to some of the questions here. The first one that came in some time ago was from Vicky. And her question is, could a lack of confidence be wrongly defined as fixed mindset?
Possibly. Without knowing the context, it's hard to answer, but certainly what someone with a fixed mindset will, sorry, I'll come back a couple of steps. Very often you develop a fixed mindset because you have failed and failed and failed and failed and literally learnt that you can't grow. And I often talk about the fixed mindset as being the fear mindset, because what it leads you to do is to fear stepping beyond your current limits, fear going into your learning zone, because you've been there before and you've failed and you've failed and you've failed. On the other hand, the growth mindset understands they can change, that when challenges come along, they can grow out of it. And I call that the courage mindset, because it gives you the courage to take on those challenges. So with a student that is lacking confidence, my question would be, what's the source? Is the source a fear of failure? And that may well then be a sign of a mindset issue. Or is the source something else, in which case there'd be potentially another way to address that?
Yeah, of course, very, very much based on the context there. Okay, question from Brittany. What are some ways teachers can bring this type of mindset training to their school to first train teachers, administrators, and then bring the practices into their classrooms?
Brittany, have a chat to Rebecca and the team. We're going to run some workshops and offer you some opportunities to do exactly that. We've got a whole bunch of online resources. If you don't want, that's one way of doing it. Certainly having a look at Carol's book is another. Having a look at mine is another. But probably the one that you want to look at, and I'm sorry, I'm a little bit off screen. I'm looking down to get a copy of this. Rebecca, this was one of the ones we put up for the notes, I think, or one of the ones we're going to send out.
Yeah.
There is one of the ones in the notes.
It is. It's the actual. Yeah. So guys, if you see your handouts there are 2 PDFs there which you can download, and that's one of them.
Yeah. So in this book, little ebook, I go through some of the issues you're going to need to consider if you're going to take this on as a whole school strategy. And in the follow-up email that you'll also get is a copy of this whole ebook, which is about the continuum and how to develop strategies that will work in your classroom. So a couple of free things to get you started, but certainly we'll be offering other opportunities for learning as well. So contact me, contact Rebecca, and we will, and the team at Infinite Learning, and we can help you out there.
Yeah, and I should just say here a very big thank you to James. We'll do more of this at the end, but just for sharing such amazing resources with no charge. It really is a very generous sharing of knowledge and hopefully resources that will support you. I think it was a really good question, Brittany, about taking it back into school and how can we educate the staff before we perhaps start to filter that down to students. It's a very good point.
If I can add something there too, I might just say that I often get asked questions about how do we teach this to students and all the rest of it. And my strong opinion is that we shouldn't be teaching mindset to students. Now, don't get me wrong, there is some good research that says if you teach students about mindset, they can be more reflective, monitor their language, and it helps. And it certainly does help. But my struggle is that when we start teaching students about mindset, we ignore the importance of teaching for mindset. And you've got to remember, these people that Carol Dweck uses as examples never had a mindset lesson. You don't need to teach about mindsets in a classroom. What you need to do is to change your pedagogy, change teachers' mindsets, so we can teach for the development of mindsets.
Brilliant, thank you, James. Okay, next question from Mark. How should we portray mistakes in a highly positive way for learning and development without ensuring that they love or enjoy mistakes?
Yeah. Mistakes aren't good or bad. All right, so what we used to say, and most of us will remember, I certainly remember as a student, big red crosses and feel guilty and mistakes are bad, don't make them. The trouble was with that was that we stopped students taking on challenges. They avoided mistakes, and that was the wrong thing to do. But what happened then was when we realized it was a bad thing and we shouldn't be doing that, someone turned around and said, well, it must be good then. And they're not good either. All mistakes are signposts to tell us what we haven't learnt. We need to treat them as a source of information. And instead of focusing on the mistake, what we need to be focusing on are the student actions. Don't praise the mistake. Praise the student for working on something hard enough to learn from. Praise the student for searching for 3 or 4 different ways to solve the mistake and correct the mistake. Because there's all this stuff, and Rebecca, if you will remind me, I'll include another little ebook that I wrote about mistakes in the follow-up email. But we don't learn from our mistakes. We learn from reflecting on our mistakes. We learn from extracting the information from them. And all these things, failing is just another way of growing and all this. Yeah. The question was, how do we portray them in a positive light, portray them in a neutral light, and portray the students' actions in a positive light? Working on things hard enough to learn from. That's where mistakes happen. The actions they take to solve the mistake and correct it, because that's what we need to be focused on. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. I'm nodding my head vigorously here, and you can't see me. Maria, I hope that also answers your question, which was also related to mistakes. Question here. This sounds like a workshop from Dion. This sounds like a workshop that can be tailored for parents.
Absolutely, Dion. In fact, often when I do my teacher workshops, teachers leave saying, I've had a lot of parenting moments. Because we grew up, I'm looking at the time, we've got limited time left, but we grew up with some very fixed messages. Our parents grew up in the self-esteem movement, where the most important thing for us was that we felt good. So when we came home and we were struggling with maths, out of the goodness of our hearts, our parents said, don't struggle. Struggling to harm your self-esteem. Look, maybe you're just not very good at maths. Find the thing you're good at. And in an effort to save us from struggle and from stress and poor self-esteem, they steered us away from struggle and effort. And as a result, we got all these fixed messages. When we delve into this and we look at how we've categorized our own children, I've sat at dinner tables with a group of parents, new parents, 2-year-old, and the 2-year-old's got colouring pencils out doing this, and one of the party guests goes, "Have they shown any artistic ability yet?" Seriously? They're holding the pen in their fist doing this? Of course they haven't, but they're looking to see, I beg your pardon, I'll just put a thing on the screen. So yes, is the short answer. I'll get carried away because there's a lot to talk about with parenting and all the rest of it. But absolutely, parent workshop, a lot of information because they're going to be important influences on students' mindset as well.
Okay, we have had a couple more questions related to sort of failure and mistakes. I think perhaps we've covered most of those. I'm getting lots of questions through, and I can see Paola's actually written to you just regarding a copy of the video, of the webinar, and certificates and handouts. So just yes, to reassure everybody, that will be sent to you tomorrow, literally this sort of time tomorrow, 24 hours after the webinar. So there'll be a copy of the recording of the video and a certificate, and that will come automatically from our GoToWebinar system. In addition to that, we will share with you some additional resources, and if you weren't able to download them from here, we'll include those as well. So lots and lots of further information and resources coming your way. But as we approach 5 o'clock, I'm going to wrap this up. I don't know if
11 o'clock.
Yeah, 11 o'clock your time. And I should say again, thank you to James for staying up so late to deliver this in a very sort of energetic manner as well, may I say. No sign of being tired there, James. So I don't know if you had anything to add at all before I say my thanks.
Oh, no, just thank you to you for giving us the opportunity to share some of this work, because I honestly believe that the teachers we're talking to and the teachers in your schools, you do the most important job in the world, that we need to prepare students for a rapidly changing world. And the first step in doing that is making sure they understand that they're capable of the change. A growth mindset is a foundation for all the learning we do. We are pushing it uphill, as they say, if we don't start with a strong foundation, a strong growth mindset. Because beyond that, students don't get up and do the work that's necessary in order to achieve that growth. So what we want, and what I talk about in the Agile Learner, and we're also going to send you the first chapter of this, here's another bonus for you, is we talk about developing students that not only understand they're capable of the growth, but also know how to go about achieving it. And that's what I'd love to share more about with you. So thank you, Rebecca and the team, for putting this together. It's been an absolute pleasure for me.
Yeah, absolute pleasure, James. Thank you so much for sharing your passion, your knowledge, your expertise. Thank you to all our attendees, over 80 of you, for joining us today. If you do have any questions that you're burning to ask that weren't answered today, or that are not answered in some of the resources, then please do get in touch, and we'll be happy to support you there. As I've said, the recording of the video and more resources will follow tomorrow. Now, next term, and you can see details of this on our website, we're running a virtual online course with James, very much specifically about what we've been discussing here. So unlimiting students, developing growth mindsets, exactly how can we take this theory and apply it to the better effect of learning outcomes for students in our classrooms. So please do visit the e-learning section on our website, www.infinitelearning.ae, to find out more. Also do visit our webinar page. You'll see other webinars that are free and that are coming up on different topic areas. We've got one coming up on professional learning, of the course of which this is part. So do take a look there. So until then, thank you once again to James, and we hope to see you all at our next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.